Do you have trouble with static in your head when you're trying to just be still, cry your heart out from God? You know, a part of the reason this happens is just the nature of how God speaks. There's a fascinating story about a man whose name is Elijah. It's found in 1 Kings chapter 19. Elijah was a prophet. Here's what it meant. Elijah was used to hearing from God, getting a message from God, and then once he got the message from God, he went and communicated it to the person or peoples that God wanted that message communicated to. He was skilled, he was experienced at hearing the voice of God. It was his calling, it was his job. After a true mountaintop experience in seeing the power of God, he ended up being gripped by a spirit of fear because of the threats of the queen, who basically said, I'm going to cut your head off. And so he fled. And he was in hiding. And God came and wanted to have a conversation. Here's what happened. God said, go out and stand before me on this mountain. And as Elijah stood there on that mountain, the Lord passed by. And a mighty windstorm hit the mountain. It was such a terrible blast that the rocks were torn loose. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, there was a scorching fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, there was the sound of a gentle whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And a voice said, what are you doing here, Elijah? Now understand what is happening. God wants to speak. Elijah, by divine command, is on this mountain all by himself. And the Lord is going to pass by. And this incredible wind that shook big boulders that went crashing down the hill went by. But Elijah, the one experienced at hearing the voice of God, never even thought God was in the wind. And he wasn't. And then this incredible earthquake that shook the mountain's foundations. Now, God doesn't speak that way either. And then this scorching fire, like a wildfire that swept up the mountainside and consumed everything that was consumable. But God doesn't speak that way. None of these dramatic, powerful, earth-shattering, miraculous ways. But then when Elijah heard something that sounded like a gentle whisper, get this. When Elijah heard something that sounded like a gentle whisper, he went, that's how God speaks. He must be here now. And he wrapped his face in the cloak because he understood if you actually see God, you'll die. So when he hears the whisper, the man experienced at hearing the voice of God said, now I know God is here and wants to talk because I hear the whisper. And he wrapped his face and he went out and there God spoke to him. God very rarely ever speaks through cataclysmic events. He speaks in a gentle whisper. And so if we want to hear it, we have to silence the noise, turn off the static, and listen. I remember so vividly last Christmas. My family and I took a vacation down to South Florida. We were able to rent a home down there and we just spent a week hanging out and having fun. And the fun would usually last pretty late into the night, and so everybody would sleep in the morning, but I have a hard time sleeping in. I think I'm getting to that place where I get up at 4 and need to go to bed about the same time in the afternoon. So I would wake up early and everybody else is still sound asleep. And I would make my way out of the house in the car, and I would drive down to one of the most sacred connection points with God on the planet. Starbucks coffee. And I would go into the sacred shrine, and I would enter, I would order my triple venti non-fat caramel macchiato steam extra hot, and I would sit down at one of the tables in the back or outside, and there was still almost nobody around, and I would just read. And I would write thoughts down, and I would just be quiet. Then you have to worry about a message that weekend. And the strangest thing happened. As that went on day after day, this impression came over me. This inkling, this nudge, this urge, this idea that seemed to have something about it compelling to move that way. To say, when you get back, I have something different for you to teach than what you were planning on. I know, Dave, I know you got the calendar laid out. I know you got a series already laid out and you've already done work on it. I've got something else I want you to do. And it was this whole idea of religion versus revolution. Institutionalized Christianity versus this dynamic, powerful movement that Jesus started. And it reoriented everything that I was going to do. And because of that, based on your own feedback, it reoriented a lot of the way we feel about our church and the direction that we're moving in. And I just find it fascinating that I had done praying and thinking and planning, but it wasn't until I was able to somehow get away, turn off the static, relax, and listen, that this whisper came and said, go this way. Do this thing. See, if we're going to really position ourselves to hear the voice of God, we've got to be quiet and just listen. Psalm 46 in verse 10 says this: be still and know that I am God. Let me paraphrase that to get the spirit of those words out. Hush. Stop running around. Shh. Quiet your heart. And if you do, you will experience my Godness. That's literally what it means. If you just stop rushing around and quiet your heart, you can experience something about me you cannot experience in any other way, like my gentle voice talking to you. We've got to be quiet